Okay, so first things first. Who are you? What's your role? And where do you work?
Okay, my name is Lin Sun. I'm the head of open source at Solo.io. I contribute primarily to open source. I wear a couple of different hats. I'm also a CNCF TOC member. I'm a CNCF ambassador, like many of you are. I'm also a maintainer on the Istio project, been serving on the technical oversight committee of Istio since the beginning of the project. I'm also a maintainer on K-Gateway and also K-Agent, the new hot CNCF AI agent project. I'm also going to be KubeCon co-chair for Amsterdam, LA, and Barcelona. So I'm so excited about that too.
I'll have some follow-up questions about all that later on. But first things first, Lynn, so how did you get into Kubernetes? How did that whole journey start?
That's a great question. Honestly, I have my vague memory about starting to contributing to Kubernetes as we learned about the project. We were trying to build, well, I was working at IBM. By the way, I had a 19-year career at IBM before I joined Solo. And while I was at IBM, I was on the team responsible to ship IBM Cloud Container Service. And we were looking at OpenStack, we were looking at Docker Swarm, we were looking at Apache Mesos, and then Kubernetes comes along. I still remember my boss, Jason McGee, back then. At the time, he was like the IBM Cloud CTO, and then he said, "This is going to be the next big thing." So we started looking at Kubernetes, and we started to attend the first KubeCon when Kubernetes was donated to CNCF. I believe that was 2016 in Seattle. I remember our leadership team flew over there. It's an exciting time. By the way, I was just looking at the contribute card by CNCF. I was actually amazed to see my first contribution was in 2016 to Kubernetes, and it was not a simple like a typo fix. It's some type of configuration issue. So I'm kind of proud I had that record stamped on my contribute card.
That is a lot to be proud of. And like you said, 2016, it feels like it was such a long time ago. And as a reminder of, that this has been going on for quite a few years, but so much has happened that period of time. And this is what I want to know, though, too. In your case, you're involved in a lot of different things. How do you stay up to date with the Kubernetes and cloud native ecosystem? How are you, on top of all the things that are happening? You're in the TOC, you're involved in all these different projects. You mentioned some of them, K-Agent, also being involved in Istio. How do you stay up to date with everything that's going on, all the changes? How do you do that?
It is super, super hard. Honestly, there's a lot of moving parts in our community. I would say I'm not super, super close to the things going on in the Kubernetes community, other than I do try to read the release notes and I check out what's exciting, right? So, I work on project which builds on top of Kubernetes. So, this allows me to focus on what's in Kubernetes that's interesting, could be beneficial to the projects I participate. So that gives me kind of a way to prioritize. And if you notice, I mostly participate in projects that's related to connectivities, right? Whether it's service mesh or whether it's gateway, which controls traffic into the Kubernetes cluster or getting out of the cluster. And also with the most recent work with K-Agent, everybody is trying to stay relevant to the AI, right? We don't want to we want to outpace with AI. So it comes natural. We need to solve agents to agents connectivity problem. We need to solve agent to MCP server connectivity problem. We need to solve agents to large language model connectivity problem. So it comes natural from my expertise in connectivity, security, on that connectivity, expand that into agents connectivity. So it does come quite natural from that perspective. But I one thing I love as a community user is I love to play with different technologies because I do believe it's too boring if I just talk about Istio, which I used to. But these days, like when I get on stage, I was actually just giving a keynote to KCD DC on Tuesday this week. Not only I talk about Kubernetes, I talk about Argo, I talk about Istio, I talk about Prometheus, I talk about Kayali. I just talk about a wide range of projects, which gives me perspective also. Even if I'm not a contributor, I'm a solid user of many of the key technologies in cloud native.
And once again, being involved in all these different projects, you must have come across so many different people. But who is someone in the Kubernetes ecosystem, the community, who helped you level up, who helped you get to the next level?
That's a really great question. I've been actually thinking about this question really, really hard. Certainly, there are a lot of people that deserve shout outs. For instance, there are times I was contributing to the community and I was doing a bunch of work and I was running for a lead position and I was not being recognized. So as everybody else, there are a lot of chances you could do great work and not being recognized. So there are some people definitely lifted me up in the past. I would say Emily Fox is a great example, which I absolutely adore her. While she always make time for other people. Mala, she's amazing. I happened to sit at a table with her and, she just, helped me and lift me up too. So, it's interesting, how the community ally together sometimes. And what's most interesting is a lot of times as a female, I didn't ask for it. Like I didn't ask, and I didn't come in as a person that's complaining why I was not in that leadership position. And people just recognize work. The other person I would definitely give a shout out is Chris Anizak. For instance, he actually really kindly reached out to me about KubeCon Kocha, which I didn't think I have a chance. So it's at the time you didn't think you had a chance, you didn't ask for it, and people actually recognize your work in the community. So it's been amazing.
And Kubernetes, being part of this community that's so big with so many different people from different backgrounds, it can mean many different things to different people. So Lin, what does Kubernetes mean to you?
So Kubernetes means to me is providing the keys to easily access distributed system. That's really the core meaning of Kubernetes for me. Say, for instance, I know how to play with deploy things on my laptop, right? But that's not sufficient. When we talk about distributed system, we're running everything in the cloud. What Kubernetes provides to me is providing that same interface. I'm interacting on my laptop with YAMLs declaratively, and I can take the same YAML and then deploy it into my distributed system in the cloud. So I think that's a really, really powerful thing about Kubernetes, that abstraction provided to me and many other users. It's just really, really remarkable to me.
You've already explained this a bit, but your path spans multiple archetypes, being on a TOC, being a co-chair in KubeCon, contributions dating back to 2016, community builder, speaking in all these different events. How do you move between these different roles?
That's a great question. Certainly, I try to be, I don't believe multitask, honestly. Like at a certain time, like I'm 100% with you, right? I'm not going to look at anything else. And when I'm traveling, speaking at the event, I try to be most focused on the events. So I try not to participate with my other activities. So like if I'm serving a TOC member, I'm not going to be active, join a weekly meeting while I'm traveling, connecting with the community, local community there. A lot of the roles I'm serving, if you look at it, right, the CNCF TOC member, that's a part-time role that demands a few hours per week. The maintainer role is also a part-time role. It's okay for the community if you don't show up for a week. They totally understand, because at the end of the day, the community are not the one who's paying you, right? So if you look at the community perspective, I participate in a few community. I don't necessarily show up at any single week, every single week, but I do show up if you look at a monthly time frame or a quarterly time frame. I do help people resolve issues in the community. People feel like I can be a person they can trust and provide feedback about our project. And I help them connect to some of the other maintainers who can actually, value the feedback a lot and may be willing to put their time to resolve some of the issues for the project. I help grow the community too. So I do wear a lot of hats, but one thing I learned about in tech is you don't want to overwhelm yourself, right? So I know the limit of what I can do, and I always try to do the best when I focus on that one thing.
And speaking of which, like you said, focusing on one thing at a time. For a lot of newcomers, for a lot of people that want to become contributors, oftentimes they struggle with that one thing that they should focus on to get plugged into the community, have a meaningful experience that will keep them coming back. Because ideally, we don't want people just bouncing off open source project. We want them to find something that's going to work for them and have a positive experience and know that they can contribute and have value that they can provide. So looking at the contributor path, what is the most practical on-ramp for first meaningful contributions? In your opinion, would you say it's more on the code side, on the doc side, and maybe it depends on different factors? If so, could you share them with us?
Yeah, so I think there's no one recipe that would work for anybody, right? So I think ideally it would be nice if you have somebody willing to fund your work. That way you have a little bit more time to contribute to the project. But I totally get it. Not everybody have that luxury. And there are a lot of people I work with, their goal is to be an open source developer, either full-time or part-time. And they want to get to that goal. And to get to that goal, they need to show contribution to existing open source projects, right? So I would recommend first think out what excites you and then find one or two projects that you would be excited to learn about, be part of it. You would be proud to share the word that, hey, I'm part of the project. I'm a contributor. I'm contributing to this thing on the project, or even speaking about the project in public. So find that one thing you're comfortable and passionate about, which is super important. So that's number one. And then number two is looking at your background and find out where you would shine, right? So some people are really good at finding bugs, submitting fixes. Just go to the repo and pick up some simple first time label issues first. That's a good pass. Some users are good at looking at the lens of the users and the adapter and then find out how the usability or how the documentation can be improved. That's also a good path. And the project will definitely value both type of people. So that's another path we definitely recommend people to take. If you are more a technologist, that's a little bit more broader, which I am too. Just go to their doc and follow those steps, the tutorial. I'm sure you'll find a tons of ways to improve. So project definitely value that. I would say the third path is more be an advocate for the project. So not contributing to code, definitely not exactly direct contribution to the docs, which you may, but as an advocate, you're willing to write blogs about the project, you are willing to go to the meetup or submit conference talk about projects, which are also super, super valuable. For instance, in the K-Agent community, we've been recognizing people who's willing to write contents for us. Like there's this person, Chris Mocha. He wrote whenever the Argo MCP server was out, the very next day, he actually wrote a blog on how to get that running with agent he developed on K-Agent. I was like, oh wow, oh my gosh, this person is amazing. So I would say there are different paths. So find a path that you are mostly comfortable. And the other thing I would add is you don't want just do the work and nobody else know you actually did the work. And so you do want to kind of promote yourself, but not in a selling way, but kind of just sharing what you did. So if you're on the code contribution path, go to the work group meeting, go to the community meeting, just share people, hey, I fixed this. Is there anything, how any other things I can help? People would really appreciate that. If you are doing a speaking or blogging, definitely post on social media, share with the project so people knows what you have done for the project. Because like I said, nobody naturally gets recognized. So you have to kind of be the advocate for yourself before other people can recognize you.
Very good point. I like that. And with a sort of mentality of, offer, don't ask. What is it that you can provide and contribute? Take the time to think about that. And then, like you said, it'll be easier to decide if it's going to be this path or that path. Moving on to the practitioner path. In your opinion, what mindset turns clusters into a reliable platform for connectivity?
That's a great question. So certainly in my experience, we've been relying on a lot of ways through platform, right? So you could potentially solve all that problem in your microservices or in your agents, but it would probably have a bloat out of microservices or agents, right? If you do that. So, or you could delegate the work to the platform, right? So you could start with maybe adopt a network policy for basic security, but network policy typically does identities based on pods, IP, and labels, and it doesn't have like cryptographic assigned identity. It doesn't upgrade the connection between the pods to mutual TLS. So that's when a service mesh really comes in, where you can rely on the platform, the mesh platform, to provide security, observability, resilience, and traffic management for you, which we recommend people to use. And for the longest time, we kind of mess up service mesh with sidecars, and people hate sidecars, which I totally get it, right? The moment you put your application in the mesh, not only you need to restart your application, you need to also restart your application when there is a new security patch. Every single Envoy fix, you need to restart your application again, pick up all that again. And then there's a humongous memory when it's all the memories adds up for all of your microservices sidecar. So I believe we fixed that problem with the sidecar-less mesh in Istio. I'm really excited about that because I've been actually running Istio in my own environment for a long time. And I stopped talking about Istio Ambient, which is the sidecar-less mesh, because it just works so transparent. Like I didn't have to worry about it. It's been a long time since I actually look at the logs for Istio now because it just worked, right? You don't actually care about logs or even some of your metrics when everything worked. It's been wonderful. So I would definitely recommend, delegate to some of the platform to handle security for your microservices. Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
No, it's perfect. It's great. And I'm glad you touched on the part about sidecars too, because in our podcast episodes, when we ask people about some of their biggest pain points in Kubernetes, people will mention sidecars, network policy management. These are things that come up quite frequently. Now, if we're focusing on the educator path, how do you make service mesh or gateway concepts click for different audiences? Everyone has a different background. Some people may be more familiar, some people may be less, depending on their objectives. So how do you make those concepts click for different audiences?
That's a really interesting topic. I've actually been learning this topic myself. Like I mentioned, English is not my first language. So I think a lot of people are not very good at marketing. But marketing is very, very important in the world of tech. So I've been kind of learning, what are the best way to kind of educate people. I think it comes down to what are your audience? What value are you providing to your audience? Because at the end of the day, people care about two things. People care about themselves, right? Which everybody care about. And then people care about other people talk about them, right? So I'm sure you care about yourself and how you are viewed in the lens of other people, right? That's the most two things people care about. So when you're trying to educate people on a particular topic, you have to think out how is that relates to them. So you have to kind of have a rough idea of the audience and what metaphor you could potentially use that would resonate to them, right? So that's kind of the thing I've been kind of thinking about myself too. And in the world of service mesh, one metaphor I use, I'm going to test it on you, see if it resonates with you, is if you are running a house, like if you're a house head of like the leader of the house, like you own your own property, right? And only the family member come into your house that you can trust, your immediate family member. In that case, you are secure the entrance of your house, I'm sure, right? You probably have a lock at your door, right? So that's kind of like the gateway, right? You control all the traffic into your property, right? And because your immediate family lives in your property, I don't know who you live with, but I assume maybe your closest family, then you probably trust them and you know them. So you don't need to do like crypt identity checking. You don't need to ask them to show me your driver's license, to show me your passport, right? When they come into your house and live there. However, if your property is big enough, you want to run kind of like a boutique hotel that has multiple rooms. Let's say you have 30,000 square feet in your house. You are kind of running a hotel business out of your house. Then you're thinking about differently. Not only you need to secure the front door, but every single guest check-in, you want to see your passport or their government issued identity, you want to give them a key and you want to reset that key. You want to kind of revoke that key when they leave, right? So that's when you potentially need a service mesh, right? Because your tenants come in and go and you want to validate everybody's identity. You want to observe, who lives into which room. Did any of guests actually use their key to attempt a room they are not allowed to access? So I think that could be potentially an interesting way to explain the value of mesh, whether you actually need a mesh, because I don't want to push people who doesn't need a mesh to tell people you actually need a mesh, because if I do that, I will lose credibility, right? That's not the thing I wanted to do. So if you put love into your audience, think about how you're going to providing value to them. I think that's the best way to educate other people.
Wow, that's a wonderful metaphor. I would love to see that in video form in terms of how you explained it, because it's a great way for people to relate to it if perhaps they don't have the technical background, but they can't imagine this idea of who's getting permission and access based on trust, familiarity, or the things that they need to do in a given space. With this in mind, imagining a house being welcoming, and also because you mentioned a couple of different things. We've been talking about a very diverse group of people from all across the world. All of them speak, many people speak different languages. For some people, English is their first. For some people, it's their third or fourth. We also have folks who communicate using sign language. We have lots of different, forms of communication. And for people that are building communities, how do you keep contributor spaces welcoming and sustainable so that everyone feels like they have an equal opportunity to be able to participate?
That's also a great question. I've been thinking a lot about that too, because in fact, I'm actually running some community meetings. One of the community meeting I run is Asian Gateway, and I used to run K-Asian community meeting. I also run the Istio community meeting. I think a key important factor is when you see a new face, it's important to ask them, to give the mic to them, ask them to kind of introduce themselves for a minute so that they feel they are welcomed, and tell them they are welcomed. That it's kind of like at the conferences, you saw sometimes people were chatting in a circle, right? And when a new person comes by, he may not know anybody in the circle, but he kind of curious, or she kind of curious, what are the conversation? Because maybe there's one person they saw on stage, they want to be part of it. So it's kind of like you lean and open up a space for the circle for that new person to come in, right? So that's the same thing I'm applying to running community meeting, which most of the time is virtual. So when a new person comes in, you give them mic to them. It's kind of like you open up the circle to them so they can have a chance to introduce themselves and tell the rest of the people at the circle why they are part of the community, what's their interest. So I think that's tremendous beneficial for the new person, but also for everybody else in the circle. So at least they know what is the intention of this person. Are they a contributor? Are they a user? Or are they going to be an advocate for the community? So that's one trick I use. The other trick I use is I try to put a shout out section towards our community meeting. So if anybody in the community wants to give any shout out to other people, that's a great place. Also, at every single week to run the community offline, we try to give a spotlight for one of our community users, and that could be a user who submitted a PR that's merged. It could be a user who wrote a blog about our community, who speak at the conference about our project. It could be a doc PR. It could be any type of contribution. It could be even open an issue, identify a problem within the community. So having that spotlight, it's kind of like a promotion card posted on LinkedIn, can generate very positive social effect for the project too.
I love that. And I want this message to be shared with everybody who's out there, because these are the experiences that will keep people coming back. Yes, the technology is exciting. Yes, it's really cool to work with open source projects. But when you have positive human experiences and you're getting recognition for the work you're doing, and starting from the starting point is that no contribution is too small and that all of these will be celebrated. I mean, this is why I've been interacting in the CNCF for the last 5 years as someone who comes from a very non-technical background. And it's because of things like this that I feel so lucky to be able to participate in this. Now, our last question, when choosing a path, what is one question that someone should ask to decide where to start? We've been talking about, different ways to get involved, but at the end of the day, it still is quite overwhelming. People might look at the CNCF landscape. Maybe they've looked at something in the Kubernetes documentation, but they just feel, wow, this is immense. Those of us who are lucky to know someone who helps us get involved, which was my case, very grateful to folks that made it very easy for me to do that. But perhaps if somebody doesn't have that kind of guidance or resources, what kind of questions should people ask to decide where is going to be the best place for them to start to have the most rewarding experience possible?
That's a great question. So we talk about a couple of paths, and I've personally gone through every single path myself. I would say, you want to think about what excites you. So that's one thing. The second thing is you want to also look at what's available out there. Because at the end of the day, I think it's super, super hard to do some of the work really, really well if you don't get paid, right? Because when you get paid, you have way more time and energy and resources to be able to do something even more meaningful. So you want to look at what's the market and opportunity out there on the market, in addition to what really excites you. Because you don't want to do anything that's not too exciting. And, what's the big thing that actually excites you, make you wake up and want to be at your desk every day, or want you to be on the road and speak, give that talk. So definitely focus on, what excites you. That's most important at the end of the day. And ideally find funding for that work too, because I do believe if you're putting 4 hours with somebody else putting 20 hours, how are you going to compete, right? It's going to be pretty hard.